We might make a start. My name is Peter Holding. I work for Farmers for Climate Action, and the first thing I'd like to do is welcome everybody to country, to the Indigenous land that we're on. I actually live on Wiradjuri land, which is sort of running from Harden, Cowra, Burra, all that sort of riverina area. I'd like to acknowledge the elders past, present and emerging, and hope everybody gets something out of this, and welcome. Now tonight we've got Ruth McGowan is going to talk to us about the actual nuts and bolts of getting elected. But before we do that, I'll hand over to Cam Close in a minute. He will chair this meeting. And the way it'll run is that Ruth will give her presentation, and then we will answer questions. Now, you could, if you look in the chat box there, you'll see a link to Slido. That's probably the easiest way and the clearest way of getting your question answered. But if you can't get that to work, you can put them in the chat box. But the trouble with the chat box is when there's a lot of people, questions get missed. But anyway, we'll do our best to get the questions in. And then probably when we've been going for a while and we've finished, say around about 8:15 or something like that, or when everybody's tired, I'll throw it open to, we'll finish the webinar, sort of the formal part, and we'll throw it open to a more general question where people will be able to open their mics and have a chat, and hopefully it doesn't get too disorderly and it works. So without further ado, I'll hand over to our Policy Director, Cam Close.
Thanks, Pete, and welcome everyone tonight. Hope you're staying warm and safe and dry in this strange year. Anyway, really excited to be running this series. Actually, last webinar, if you missed it, we had two mayors talking about what you can actually do at local council, why they ran, and some of the changes that they as mayors have been able to do in their local community. So if you missed that, we'll post a link to that one also in the chat box. Tonight we've got Ruth McGowan, who I like to call an election expert. She's run for local government herself. She was mayor of her community, and she also, in 2013, was one of the instrumental people behind Cathy McGowan, the Independent for Indi's successful campaign. So she's got runs on the board, and she's tonight going to walk us through a sort of nuts and bolts session of how to structure your campaign to hopefully get you elected. And she's also done a little bit of extra work, which is really useful this year, in what campaigning looks like in an era of COVID. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Ruth, and just really quickly again, we'll be taking questions either through Slido or in the chat box. So if you have any questions throughout, we'll save those questions up till the end, because there's a chance Ruth might answer some of them before the end of her presentation, and then we'll open them to Ruth. And then at 8:15, when the webinar ends, if people want to stay on and have a general chat, we can all unmute and sort of chat, and Pete will help coordinate and share that. So over to you, Ruth.
Thanks, Cam. Hope everyone can hear me. Can you give me a thumbs up? Cool, yep. Great. Well, I'm talking to you from West Gippsland, which is high rainfall area, the bottom southeast of Australia. And I'm really looking forward to having a chat with all you folk tonight. So thanks very much for giving me your time for the next hour and a half. And I hope that it's going to be really useful to you. I guess I've learned a bit doing Zoom over the last 6 months now, and I'm trying really hard a few different things to keep it engaging. I really respect the fact that it's Wednesday night at 7 o'clock. You've given up a Wednesday night. You could be watching the news, watching the curve, watching the same old news again, but you're here on a webinar. So my commitment to you is to keep it engaging. And every now and then I'm going to ask you to chuck something in the chat box so I know that you're awake. I encourage you to have your favourite beverage at hand. Mine's water. Good luck to yours if it's a beer or a glass of wine on a Wednesday night or a cup of tea. So the first thing I want to do is also acknowledge the traditional owners on the land on which I'm talking to you from tonight, and that's the Gunai-Kurnai people of Gippsland. And I'm in the municipality of Baw Baw Shire, so we have an Aboriginal name, and over the years I've learned a lot from the traditional owners, elders past, present and emerging about so many things, and I'm really grateful for that. I invite you to put in the chat box so that I know it's working, and this is not questions, but just could you put in the chat box what municipality you're in, and if you know the traditional owners, can you put that in as well? And I'm asking you to do that so if we were in a big hall, we already would have walked in and shaken hands with each other and go, yeah, where are you from? What council do you, like we would have already done that. And of course we can't. So online, I'm trying to use as many tools as I can so you get to know each other as well. So if you could put that in, Yorta Yorta, Indigo, Shire, Cam, East Gippsland, Castlemaine, Jar Jar Warring. So we're getting quite a few coming through there. So I encourage you to have a look at that too and see where's everyone come from, the traditional owners and the municipalities. We've got a real variety there, haven't we, of people from all over the place. Bega Shire, Yuin Country, Eurobadella, and that's incredibly beautiful. Those scarred from recent bushfires land up there. Maroondah Council, Tamworth. So thanks. Everyone can have a look at that, and you can keep looking and seeing where people are come. You might be surprised to find someone there from your same municipality as well. That brings me to some of the assumptions I want to make tonight. And I like to be clear about the assumptions I'm making, so you know we're all on the same page and you're at the right webinar. So this is the second of a series, and tonight's webinar is actually going to focus on the nuts and bolts of what you need to do to run a campaign for public office to get elected. The assumptions I'm going to make are that you're really interested in running for public office and that you want to change the world through politics, and also that you've got good internet. So let's hope that it works for all of us and we can stay connected. And that's always a big assumption to make in rural and regional areas. Trust me, but I have a plan B. If I drop out, Cam's going to run the show for a little bit and then I'll come back in. So they're the assumptions I'm making. And of course, the most important one is I don't have to argue with you about climate change. Thank goodness. So thanks for coming on board, everyone. Okay, the other thing I've learnt with Zooms is that you do get a little bit sick of looking at your own face and at everyone else. And there's an opportunity to have some privacy. So if you want to stop your video and go off, or you have to deal with kids at bedtime or finish eating your tea, feel free to do that. That's okay. So what I'm going to do is to give you a break from just staring at me as well, is I'm going to share my screen, which you should be able to see right now. Does that work? Yep. Work, Cam? Yep, that's great. Okay, so you know you're in the right room because we're now talking about how to get elected. And you've told me where you're sitting today. So if I could also ask for a little bit of a feel, and again, you can look at each other. I want to know if you've ever run for office before. Can you put your hand up? Give me a thumbs up. Okay, is this your first time for office? Just give me a sideways thumb. Yep, a few there. If you're not running but you're here to listen, just give me a thumbs down, that's fine. As the young kids say, you're here for the lols, for the laughs, for an entertainment. Give me one of them. And if you don't know, just give me a big shrug, or if you just want to move your shoulders because you're getting a little bit stiff. So I can see there's quite a bit of diversity in the room, but as I said, this webinar, we're going to focus on the assumption that you're running for council or state or federal office down the track. And so therefore the focus that I'm going to be looking at is 9 things that you need to do to get going on a campaign. And it's going to be fast and furious. Normally I would run this as a half-day workshop, and we'd have breakout groups and we'd have a chance to do all the nice chatting and a bit slow. But as I said at the beginning, I'm really privileged to have a short amount of your time, and I want to respect that by going fast and furious. And if I can invite you to get your notebook out and take notes, every now and then I'm going to sing out what a key action is to get a campaign happening. And for those of you that might be going to sleep, when you hear this, it means I'm giving you an action to write down in the notebook. Does that make sense? Okay. And if you're going to sleep, wake up when that happens. No, you don't have to toast the bride, but you do have to write something in your book. Okay. So the things we're going to cover tonight are, the first thing first is clarifying your purpose. Secondly, what is your message? And refining that message so then you've got something to communicate to voters and to promote throughout your electorate or ward. I'm going to be talking about managing the finances of a campaign, what obligations you have to meet, how to be resourceful, and how to keep the pace up over the weeks and months of your campaign, and lastly about COVID. You'll notice there I'm not going to talk about 101 local government, what it is, what is the role of a MP or a councillor. I'm not going to do that because you'd all fall asleep on me. But more importantly, there is other training that is offered by local councils in that area. So you won't be hearing about the roles and obligations of a councillor from me, and you won't be hearing too much about what a councillor does because the mayor's covered that last week. So let's roll. The first area I think that's really important to think about before you even start a campaign is to clarify the reason behind why you want to run for office. And Jenny O'Connor last week said she ran for local government because it's where she gets stuff done. Well, a fortnight ago when she spoke. And she talked about that one of the things she was able to do as a mayor was get the climate emergency declaration through her council. And look, it mightn't have changed the United Nations or world affairs, but it got people in her community talking about climate action. Greg Conkey said that he ran because he wanted a seat at the table as a decision maker, not as a participant. He wanted to be in the tent where things were happening, not outside. So I'm going to challenge you tonight to think about, why are you running? Be clear on your purpose. Because as Julia Gillard said recently, when she launched her book, and she's been on the radio a lot lately, be clear on your purpose because you will need it for the days when you get rattled. And politics is a tough game. There are going to be times where it's hard to drag yourself out of bed, but if you're clear on your purpose, a bit like your North Star or your compass and your radar directions, you will know where you're going, and it will keep you focused. So clarifying your purpose, I'd like you to think about, what do you want to change? So as Lily Tomlin said, I used to think they should do it, but then I realised they was me and I need to change it. So what do you want to change? Thinking about, do you want to change how the money is spent by, taxpayers in your territory or your state, or in how rates are spent in your municipality? Do you want to have more community engagement? Do you want better planning decisions to be made? Do you want to stand for equality and diversity and inclusion goals in your representation? Where is the change that you want to see? What change do you think council could do? Is it about climate action? What specific changes do you want to see in climate action? So you will have in your head the reason why you think running for public office is a good idea. And I often say there's 3 reasons people run for office. It's either because they're really pissed off about something that the decision makers have done, and they want to get in and change it. Or they're really passionate about a cause and they want more to be done on the cause. or they think politics is a great career option and they want to get stuff done through politics. So I call that the 3 Ps that drive people's motivation. Sometimes it's a combination of all of those things. So if you can think about what do you want to change, politics is the way to do it, but you also have to be ambitious for power. And power is not a dirty word, because power is how you get stuff done. And in politics, you get your hands on the levers of power. That's what's so great about politics. So be ambitious for power, and to be ambitious, you also need to be a bit competitive. So nothing's ever going to get done if you keep complaining about what they should be doing, what other people should be doing. And I often say, don't wait for politicians to act, become one. So thank you for coming along here tonight to listen to how you can become a politician. So this is where the challenge comes, when you've got to clarify and practice your message. I invite you to learn to say in 25 words or less, I'm standing for office because. And get used to saying that. Like, imagine you're at the pub and someone goes, oh, Bob, I hear you're running for Westport. Why are you doing that? And you go, oh, well, I'm running because I think it's about time we had a climate action plan for council. And someone might say, oh, Kim, you're going to be running for the southeast of the Shire. Why do you want to stand for council? It's terrible. And Kim might say, well, I think we need diverse representation, and we've got 9 men on council and we need another woman. We need at least 50% women, so I'm putting my hand up. So think about your 25 words or less, and be mindful that most people make up their mind about you in 7 seconds. So if you're waffling and 3 minutes later the person's asleep, that's not going to work. You're not going to be able to get your message across. So that's why my challenge to you is to think about what is your 25 words or less, and first action, have that clear. And if you haven't got that already in your head, practice writing down 25 words or less why you want to run for public office. Okay, so I've got a tool to help you then, once you've got your 25 words or less, how you can develop your message. And I call this the 4B3 tool. And it's not a plank of wood that you can go down and get from 9 to 10. It's a very simple tool. So I'm going to show you how this works. I invite you to pick 3 themes that you're passionate about. So one of them might be climate action. One of them might be diversity. One of them might be greater accessibility for disabled people in transport in your ward. So I'm going to talk about council at the moment rather than state or territory elections. So you want climate action, you want diversity, and you want accessibility for transport. So the first action is to write 1 page on each of those themes. Fill up a page with everything you know about it and you think needs to be done. 1 page. So then you've got 3 pages on the things you're passionate about. And when you can keep it to 1 page, then you can use that 1 page when you have to give a 20-minute talk at a Meet the Candidates forum. Then the next thing I encourage you to do is crunch that 1 page down into 1 paragraph on each of your 3 topics. So a paragraph might be 250 words. And what is it you know about what needs to be done for climate action and what you're going to do if you get elected? What is it you want to change in diversity? What is it you want to change in accessible footpaths or transport options for people with disabilities? 1 paragraph on each. And then you can use that in your flyers that you send out to people or newsletter articles. So you do it once and then you communicate it often. Then the next, crunching it down, 1 sentence on each theme. So you might say climate action is important for our future and we can't wait. Or women are 50% of our population and we need women on council. And your 3rd theme might be we need connectivity in all our footpaths, in West Wyalong Shire, whatever it is, you've got one sentence. And then you can use this for your candidate statement. And in Victoria, we're allowed 300 words on a candidate statement, which goes out with a postal ballot. So you can use that sentences of your platform in your candidate statement. The last thing is crunch each theme down to a word. So your word for climate action might be sustainability and diversity and accessibility. So therefore you've got 3 words, and you can use them in your slogans, whether it's across the top of your flyer, across your leaflet, on your t-shirt, bumper stickers, whatever. So my second action for you is to practice the 4x3 tool. And I go into a bit more detail on that in my book for those of you that have got Get Elected, how to do that. But I'm hoping that makes some sense. And this is a simple tool to get clarity on your message, because people don't want to hear about 7 things you're running for. The mind can only hold about 3. So this will help you get clarity on your message. And then once you've done that, then there's the opportunity to communicate your message. So here's some examples of flyers, t-shirts. There's a couple, there's one down there, Kathy on her t-shirt. She was local, independent and effective. They were her 3 words. And then she had policies on her website, so way back. So the beauty of that 3x4 is that you can go up and down depending on the occasion, but your message is always consistent and clear. So whether it's your core flutes or on your candidate statements, your same message is consistent and clear of what you stand for. So I invite you to practice that. And then thinking about your flyers, so I'm going to give the example of Victorian local council elections, which are coming up in 2.5 months. But the ballot papers, so it's all postal, and the ballot papers go out in about 7 weeks. So it's not that long to go. So if you're running for Victorian local government elections in October, you probably need to be designing your flyers right now. And the action 3 there is that you start the first draft of your 300-word statement now, because I expect by the time you hand that in to the Victorian Electoral Commission, 3rd week of September, you'll be up to like 10 or 12 drafts. So start practicing what your 300-word statement is, which is those couple of sentences. And you can start designing your posters and your pamphlets and sending them out. So I'm mostly talking to rural and regional people tonight. There are a couple of people here that are in stage 4 lockdown in Melbourne, and there are some challenges there in terms of what you can do. And there are too in regional Victoria, but not as bad as Melbourne at the moment. And for people in ACT or New South Wales or other parts of Australia at the moment, you haven't got the restrictions we're facing yet. But watch and learn how we're learning to campaign, because New South Wales elections are September next year, and who knows what's going to be happening. New South Wales local government elections. You may be in stage 4 lockdown next year. Hope not, but could be the case. So once you've started to design what your look is and your brand, the next step is to communicate it and get it out, promoting it. So there's 3 ways that I suggest you think about doing that. And the first one is social media. And the main platform for social media that's used in Australia is Facebook. In fact, 90% of Australians go on Facebook at least once a month. And for certain age groups, it's several times a day. So it's the main one, and it's probably the most simplest one to get on at the moment. So you can set up a page for a politician. So you could be, you know, Susan James for West Ward, Baw Shire Council. So you can set up a page with that candidate for West Ward, Baw Shire Council. And you can set that page up now. And if you're going to do that and you've got your own personal family and friends one, I encourage you to hibernate that one for the next couple of months before the election, particularly I'll talk to Victorian candidates here. So the election's, 2.5 months away. I encourage you to set up a Facebook page now for your candidacy, hibernate your personal one and swing everyone over to your candidate one. And on that, you can start to post your flyers, your themes. You can connect with community groups, whether it's a local ratepayers group, sustainability networks, land care groups, whatever community groups have a Facebook page in your municipality. You can join that on your politicians page and start to see what the issues are and start to promote yourself as well. So I've got the megaphone there because in COVID times where you can't go out and meet people face to face, Facebook is like the megaphone. That's how you shout, but it's also the ears. It's how you listen to what's going on. And you can join, I encourage you to join the Facebook pages of the local media to see what people are talking about, and particularly your local council. They all have Facebook pages. What are people talking about there? What's annoying them? And what do they like? So that's how you can listen now when you don't have public meetings where you can go and talk to people. It's going to be on social media. Instagram is a good one. If you've already got Instagram and you're familiar with it, it's a useful way to explain to people what you're doing. So you might go out for a drive and see like a playground that's got wrecked swings and they aren't working. And you might say, we need to put money into children's playgrounds. And if I get elected, I can do that. So think about what photos you can take to do with, say, climate action and your platform, and then put that on your Facebook page. There's also an opportunity to do surveys there. So you can run surveys and polls through Facebook, or you can do SurveyMonkey, which is free, and ask people what are some of their issues at the moment. And then when you get those responses back, you can make a press release, talk to the media about it, or put the results on your Facebook, and there's another post there. Twitter is useful in terms of influencing and engaging with journalists. So probably not so much your future constituents or current voters, but it's got the links to, say, ABC journalists. If you've got rural and regional radio, community newspapers, they're usually on Twitter. And you can direct message them and say, I've got a story. Can I talk to you tomorrow? So it's really useful that way. So talking about that, the media, don't forget traditional media, because there are still many people that tune into traditional media. If you're lucky enough to still have a local regional newspaper, we have one that comes out once a week here. It's called the Warragul and Druin Gazette, and people read it religiously. It's privately owned, but it's a really great space to send letters to the editor about issues you're agitating about. And hopefully the editor will print them, but it can raise your profile around your words. And that's where one paragraph on an issue that you're passionate about can be really useful for a letter. The radio as well, I talked about local ABC radio. Lots of people listen to that, but also your community radio. If you've got one, it's worth ringing them up because they're always looking for talent and content to fill the airwaves. So give your community radio a call and say, look, I've got 3 things I'd love to talk about. Can you give me 10 minutes? I can do it by the phone. Can we do it next Thursday? The third area, I think it's a really useful way to promote your message out, is by writing letters to clubs and organisations in your municipality. And this is particularly useful in COVID times because you can't turn up at the Rotary Club meeting or the CFA, Country Fire Authority, or the, farmers meeting, the land care meeting. You physically can't go to them at the moment in Victoria. You might be able to in other states, but in Victoria you can't. So my suggestion here, because of COVID times, is to send them a letter, introduce yourself, talk about your platforms. This is where you might give 2 sentences per issue, and say, look, I'm really happy to present at your next meeting, whether it's by Zoom or it's a mixture of Zoom and in person. I'm really happy to come along for 10 minutes and talk about what I'm standing on, and most importantly, to listen to your questions. But don't forget the old-fashioned letters, because that's a great way for you to tune into what's going on out in your community. And the added advantage, not to be forgotten, is that if you send them a letter, it has to be recorded on incoming correspondence. And I bet I'm speaking to a lot of people that have been secretaries of various committees and organisations in rural and regional Australia. And you know, when you get a letter, you actually have to read it out that this letter came from Ruth McGowan, and we need to, you know, to respond to this letter. So what do we say? And then the group gets to talk about you for a couple of minutes. So bingo, that's a really simple little way just to raise your profile. So action 4, if you haven't done so, I encourage you to set up your Facebook page. And, you know, if you know some people on this webinar tonight, share it with them. And encourage the opportunity to share with your friends and your family and get people to like it. Okay, so we're moving on from messaging and communication to money. And the money side of it is a necessary part of campaigning. People often ask me, how much money do you have to spend on a typical campaign? And it does vary, but I'd say for a local government campaign, it might be something like 2,000 to 5,000 in rural Australia. That said, there are some people that spend the nomination fee, which in Victoria is $250, and that's it. They don't spend anything else. Now, those people have already got a really good profile in the community, or they might be running again, and they're the incumbent, the elected councillor, or being mayor, so they don't have to do much. But most people spend about 2,000 to 5,000. If you're running for a state seat, that might be up to 50,000. And for a typical federal seat, that might be like $100,000. Even more if it's a really tightly contested seat. So Eden Monero, apparently the two major parties spent over $1 million each there. So good luck. Even if you're with a party, and some of you may be with a party tonight, you still have to raise your own money. So I would encourage you to do a budget. And a simple budget is, well, what's your incoming? It's either going to come from your own pocket or it's going to come from donations. And the outgoing, the basic outgoings are if you're spending on social media and IT, like you might be doing advertising on social media, traditional advertising, doing a half a page ad in your local paper. You're spending on prints and flyers and posters. You might be spending a little bit on some merchandise. You might want to do a bulk mail out as well. So one thing that people don't realise, when you nominate as a candidate, you actually get a copy of the electoral roll. So every registered voter, you get their name and their address. So much for privacy in Australia, but they're allowed to do it. So if you've got enough money and if you're savvy, you can actually do personally addressed emails to every voter in your ward. So if you've got the electoral roll and you're in a small rural council, you might only have 1,200 people that live in your ward, and you could actually send a letter to each of them. If you're smart enough to do the mail merge on Excel to Word and get a letter done, or you've got friends that can help you with that, the letter can be addressed to, Dear Jenny Smith, I'm running for, let me introduce myself. My name is Ruth McGowan. I'm running for West Ward on these 3 things that I'm really passionate about. I'd love to have your support come October elections. And bang. So you could do that. The other option for mailing is unaddressed mail, otherwise known as junk mail. And that's when you get the catalogues in your mailboxes. But Australia Post does that, as does private contractors, but it costs money. So you need to think about, well, what do I need to do? What do I want to do in my campaign? Nomination fees, I said in Victoria, that's $250. There's other expenses that you will have too that you'll need to track. And the important thing is to keep track of every gift and every donation you get, of who gave it to you. No accepting money in Aldi bags or paper bags, because it's against the laws. So whenever someone gives you a donation, issue a receipt but it also means that you need to have a system and process for recording donations. The simplest thing is an Excel spreadsheet. There are other fancy ways of doing it, but you need to have a tracking system, because let me give you an example. In Victoria, New South Wales, Queensland and Victoria, they've all got strict rules around reporting campaign donations. And in Victoria, you have to do it within 40 days of the election, even if you didn't get elected, and even if you got no gifts or no money, you still have to fill in a return and send it back. So make sure you've got a system that tracks your money. And those details can be, I'll talk about that a little bit further about your compliance. But action number 5, do a budget for your campaign and start dreaming big. What could you do? Okay. I've just mentioned there are a few of your candidate obligations. So the first thing, which it's pretty obvious, but you've got to check, am I eligible to be a councillor or an MP? And I encourage you to visit your electoral commission, whether it's New South Wales Electoral Commission, BEC, Queensland, or if you're running federally, the Australian Electoral Commission, and they all have rules and obligations that you need to be eligible. And we know federal government is notorious for their section 44 about you can't be a dual citizen. Most states and territories and local governments you can be, but check your electoral commission rules around whether or not you can nominate, so whether you're eligible. And then you have obligations around nominations. So there's things you need to do, such as in Victoria, you're going to have to make an appointment to sit down at a Victorian Electoral Commission office and be interviewed. Moment, I think that might need to move online, but it's a bit of a moving feast in Victoria. The goalposts are shifting every day. In Victoria and Queensland, there's mandatory training for local government candidates. Not sure whether that's going to happen in New South Wales next year. It could, but you have to do a compulsory 1-hour training, which is all that boring stuff I was talking about before about your obligations as a councillor. I think it's quite worthy. It's a good initiative. The Victorian Local Government Act was updated this year, and that's one of the new requirements. It's the first time that's going to happen. It's going to be rolling out pretty soon. Local Government Victoria hasn't yet announced the dates, but you can do that online in the comfort of your house, and then you get certified that you've done it. Some of the other obligations I talked about before was reporting, and one of the most important things about that draft campaign material is make sure it's authorised. And that is the bit that, authorised by Bill Smith on behalf of the Liberal Party Canberra that you often hear at the end of ads. So you can get that authorised in Victoria. You can do it yourself or someone else can do it. And one of the great changes as well with the recent Local Government Act is that you can actually now use a PO box instead of being able to use your home address. And that was brought in as a safety issue, particularly for women that felt uncomfortable having their home address at the bottom of flyers. So now you can use a PO box, and you can use your mate, whether it's Jenny Smith, she can endorse you, authorise you, and it's also an endorsement down the bottom. So a tip there is if you don't want to authorise your stuff, and you know someone that's pretty well known in your community, ask them if they could authorise it for you. In Australia, if you've got a brother-in-law or a brother or an uncle who's an AFL footy player, get them to do it, because we know how important sport is in Australia. Or a sister who's a well-known netball player, or a niece who plays hockey. Just if you've got someone famous or well-known in your area, ask if they can endorse it for you, authorise it for you, because that's an endorsement. Unfortunately, one of the big obligations we need to meet now is candidate obligations around campaigning in COVID restrictions. And as I mentioned earlier, these are particularly pretty tight in Victoria. They've put out, the Local Government Victoria has actually put out safe COVID campaigning guidelines, and they put them out on the 30th of July, and they were basically redundant the next day with the new restrictions that came in. And we've all been waiting for the next iteration of them, and they've come out today. So perhaps, Cam, if you can do a link to that, it's under the COVID Safe campaign guidelines under the Victorian government. And they've got what you can and can't do in stage 4 restrictions. So sorry for you people in Melbourne or on the outskirts of Melbourne and Mitchell Shire in one of those 31 local government areas. Stage 4 restrictions make campaigning very tough. Stage 3 less so, but you still can't go out and shake hands, which is the lifeblood of politicians, one-big politicians. You can't go to public meetings and stare down the hecklers. You can't hug people, you can't kiss babies, you can't do any of that now as a politician. So there are lists and rules around what you can do and what you can't do, and they're covered in those guidelines. And I expect by the time the New South Wales local council elections come around, you may have some similar guidelines produced by your government of what you can and can't do as well. Now, I've talked about a lot of things, but the golden rule is read the candidate's handbook. And every electoral commission, so the New South Wales Electoral Commission, the Victorian Electoral Commission, the AEC will produce a candidate's handbook. The Victorian one dropped last week, and it's got, I know, 50 pages of information to read, and that is my action 6 for anyone in Victoria. Download that candidate's handbook and read it back to cover 3 or 4 times to make sure you meet all the governance requirements. Okay, how are we going? Going okay? I'll take a bit of a breath there, because the next thing I want to move on to is managing your resources. And there's 3 key resources to manage in a campaign. It's time, and basically you never have enough of it. But you've also got to meet deadlines. It's money. I've already talked about that. And the third one is skilled people. That's the people on your team. So let me unpack a little bit what I mean by each of these resources and give you some tips and hints on how to manage them for a campaign. So when we're thinking about time, there's a number of deadlines, and I have mentioned some already, but I'll go through a couple now. So the VEC, or the New South Wales Electoral Commission deadlines, specify things such as the enrolment roll. If you're not enrolled, you can't stand as a councillor or an MP, and you can't vote. And in Victoria, the enrolment, the roll closes the last Friday of this month. I think it's 57 days before an election. So there's rules around all that. So you've got to check whether you're enrolled. You can just go to the VEC website or the AEC website, New South Wales EC website, and you can enter your details and it will tell you whether or not you're enrolled. Make sure you're enrolled at your right address where you live now, not the one where you lived 6 years ago. So look at those deadlines. I mentioned before, start preparing your candidate statement, because you have to hand it in on a certain day, and there's no leeway around that. It has to be in at a certain time. Printing deadlines, sometimes it might take 2 to 3 weeks to get something designed and printed and back to you. That's why time is so important, because you don't have time to waste. If you want to be getting leaflets out in August, then you have to get them off to a printer pretty soon. Think about those compulsory training. As I mentioned, check out those training opportunities on your council website. Media and advertising deadlines, they're quite strict. If you don't meet them, then you won't be able to get your ad in. So I'll give you an example of in Victoria, the ballot papers go out the 6th, 7th and 8th of October. Actually, they go out on the Monday, but they land on people's tables on the 6th, 7th, 8th of October. And most people fill them in that night and post them back the next day. The reason? Because they're going to get a fine if they don't. And they also don't want it to get lost in all the clutter that happens in normal households. So they fill that out on the night and send it back the next day. And it's probably the first time they've thought about an election. So if you want to get bang for your buck for advertising, you might want to do an ad the week before in the local paper, and you might want to do one on the Monday and say the Wednesday. And the advertising deadlines for, say, the 1st or 2nd of October, you might have to have your ad in 2 weeks before. I don't know. If you want to advertise in a community newsletter, you have to think about what those deadlines are. So where I live in a little hamlet of Jindervik in West Gippsland. We have a community newsletter that's 4 pages. It comes out on the 1st of the month. The deadline is 2 weeks before. So if I was hoping to get to the October newsletter, I would have to submit something by the middle of September. So find out what your deadlines are of your media and advertising, and again, put them in your diary. And also if you're doing letters, sending them out through Australia Post, or you're doing unaddressed mail, the leaflets out to people, they've got deadlines as well. They need them all packed and folded by a certain date. So check them out. Australia Post has all those guidelines on its website. And if you're at it, so the VEC has this up on their website, what all those deadlines are. And Action 7, put these deadlines in your diary, either electronically, or if you're like me, I like to have a visual wall calendar. And each day I've got something in there that needs to get done, whether it's, you know, appointments or whatever, it's in that diary. So start putting the time deadlines in your diary so you've got them locked in. And I'll give you an example of where that can be a risk if you don't. So in Victoria, nominations open on the 17th of September and they close on the 22nd. Now, if you thought you could rock up to the VEC at 4 o'clock on the 22nd and be sneaky and put your nomination in at the last minute, you'll lose, because the nominations close at midday on the 22nd and you won't have another chance to run until 4 years in 2024. So that's just an example of why it's really important not just to put the day, but the hour of some of those deadlines too. They're a little bit tricky that way. And you don't want to, you know, scuttle your whole campaign just because you missed out on the deadline by 2 hours. I've seen it happen. All right, so the second resource is money. And as I said before, if you want to run a campaign, most of us don't have those really deep pockets to do what you want to. If you have, good luck to you. Then most of us have to raise funds to be a candidate, particularly independent candidates. So the first thing that I think's really critical in your budget is to set that fundraising goal, which you've already done if you've done that action of your budget. And then you know how much you need to raise. So let's say you want to raise $1,000. Make it easy for people to donate to you. So you might have something like PayPal, or you might have an EFT and a separate bank account that people can donate to and get an automatic receipt. Make it easy for them to give you money, because people can't give you cash now. If you're in New South Wales or other states, you might still be able to go to farmers markets and set up a store. One of the things that I've seen people do is have one of those squares, you know, those white squares that they often have at farmers markets. You can get them for about $15 from Officeworks, and people wave their card over it and give you $20, and then you can give them a receipt at the same time. So that's one really good way. And also the added bonus, you don't have to handle cash. So look, think of those squares. Another tip here is to tell people what you're going to do with their money. So for instance, you could say, I need $200 and I'm going to print 5 core flutes, which I'm going to put on all my friends' farm gates. And people go, oh, that's great. I'm giving you $200, you've got 5 core flutes. Or if you give me $400, I'm able to do a half-page ad in the Warrnambool Standard on the day the ballot papers reach people. So think about matching up donations with things you need for your campaign, because it actually is an incentive for people that it's not just going into, you know, collateral bank accounts. Another way to raise some funds here is sell something unique for your cause. And I'm sure as members of Farmers for Climate Action, being rural people, you've got a lot of innovation and imagination happening. So what could you sell that people could buy that could go as a fundraiser? And even online, people are having online concerts where they might have a friend who's a muso and they'll say, okay, Friday night from 5 to 6, I've got a concert. I'm setting up an event through Eventbrite. It's $50. and it's all going to my campaign, and you'll get to hear one of the best musos in Northeast Victoria play the guitar for an hour, and I'm taking requests, right? And if you get, 50 people going, imagine how much money that's going to raise. So $2,500 banged in there for one night, and that's your fundraising done. So I encourage you to consider online events in these COVID times and be really innovative and creative around what you're doing. The third area that is in terms of resources to manage is your people and your team. And I have a saying that is, if you don't ask, you don't get. And I'm sure you've got lots of skilled friends and families and people that can help you. From a niece who's a fantastic photographer who can take your campaign shots, to someone who is really good on social media that can help you set up a Twitter account, someone that knows how to schedule Facebook posts on a Sunday night so you don't have to do it every night of the week. But you've got to ask and you've got to get help. Maybe even letterboxing, and for those of you that can still do it, door knocking. Teams can help you with door knocking. I've got some of the resources up there out there too. So there's people, but there's lots of resources out there that you can tap into. In Victoria, the MAV run training, as do the Victorian Local Governance Association. Keep an eye on the Climate Council Facebook page. There's often great stuff there, and training obviously here for Farmers for Climate Action that you can tap into. There is also resources on YouTube. So there's a great documentary called Your Community, Country and Council for any people here that are interested in supporting Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, or if you're from that community yourself. So I'm just going to jump to a couple of questions there. Are you allowed to put flyers in people's letterboxes when you might have COVID-19 germs on them? Well, good question, because just today, the local government Victoria said that if you're in stage 4 restrictions, you can't do that. So that's in those guidelines that just came out today. Yesterday, I would have said, yeah, as long as you do it within your 1 hour and you're on your exercise and you're wearing gloves, but I'm not going to tell you that today. But if you're in stage 3, regional, rural Victoria, New South Wales and other places, yes, you can do that. But the optics are pretty important there. So obviously I'd be wearing a mask and I'd be having blue gloves on, so people don't feel that you're putting germs all over their leaflets that they then have to pick out of the mailbox. Door knocking in traditional campaigning, I'd say it was really important. It's like the ace up your sleeve. If you can have conversations with people on their door about what you're running for, it's a really effective way to get support for your platform. But in these times, I would discourage door knocking. I mean, I live in rural regional Victoria. I'm not even getting the Jehovah's Witnesses coming down the driveway at the moment. It's just like, I really don't want anyone knocking at my door at the moment, because I think, well, are you here for contact tracing? Are you a police person? So I wouldn't encourage door knocking at the moment. But, read your community. If you're in far north Queensland and everyone's still going to the pub and cafes, give it a crack. Okay, so one of my point here too is that I've gone fast and furious here, folks, and I can understand that there's a bit of an overwhelm here. People are going, well, why would I do that? Be mindful that I've given you the best that I can give you in an hour so far. So it is going to be overwhelming. I do encourage you to check that out. And I've sent through the first chapter, because you can read that at your leisure around how to run an effective campaign. And if you're not running for Victoria or ACT elections or Queensland elections, then you've got a fair bit of time. But Victoria, ACT and Queensland have all got elections in October, and Northern Territory's in a couple of weeks. So if you live in New South Wales and Queensland and WA and South Australia, you've got a bit of time left. But for those people, particularly the Victorians, you don't have to have this all figured out to move forward. Just take one step at a time and ask for help. So that's probably my action number 8. Ask for help. If you don't ask, you don't get, and you'll be surprised how many people actually want to help you on your campaign. So remember just to pace yourself. It's a marathon, not a sprint. The last thing we want is candidates that are there to bring climate action to the fore to knock themselves out because they're overwhelmed and tired. We need you out there changing the world and making things a better place. All right, so my last point I want to cover is about the COVID elections. It's very different this time. It has turned traditional campaigning on its head, which makes it very difficult, particularly for people in Victoria. And I've actually developed a 2-page flyer on campaigning in COVID times. Quite a few I've covered tonight. And particularly the importance of going online, that if you haven't got a Facebook page, and particularly if you're a first-time candidate, I would encourage you to think about doing that, because that's where people are at online. Think about how you can cut through the plethora of pandemic messages. Understandably, most people are anxious about it, but it's just every radio, every TV, all the conversations are about a pandemic. So you're going to have to work extra hard to cut through all of that to get your message heard about what you want to do. And there's some, you know, in every crisis, there's an opportunity. So one of the themes that I've heard, which is particularly relevant to you, is people are saying, look what's changed so quickly with the pandemic. Why can't we do that with climate action? So you can think about, well, if they've done that for a pandemic, why can't they do it for this and relate it to climate action? So you can still use that theme, but make it work for you. Part of that is telling the story of why you want to run, and tell the story of the election. It's a surprise to me, but most people don't know that there's an election coming up in Victoria in October. In fact, I'd say 99% of people don't have any idea council elections are coming up. It's something I'm passionate about, that I'm passionate about politics, but most people don't know. And that means there's an opportunity for you to tell the story. So you can say, if you're a Victorian candidate in Strathbogie and you're ringing up the local community radio, you could say, did you know that there's local government elections coming up in October? And the interviewer will say, oh, well, what day is that? How are we going to vote? And you could go, no, it's okay. You don't have to vote. It's all by postal, or you don't have to vote in person. It's all by postal. And in fact, you're going to get a postal vote on the 6th, 7th and 8th of October. Oh, and how long have we got to fill that in? Well, you've got 2 weeks, and don't forget to do it or you'll get a fine. So see how I'm doing that? You tell the story. There's also an opportunity to tell the story of what you're doing differently in a COVID campaign. People actually want to hear that. So tomorrow I'm actually going on the local ABC radio here in Sale. They've rung me up and they've said, well, we hear that you're interested in campaigning and how to help and support people. Maybe they saw the flyer for this. And they said, can you come on the radio and talk about the challenges for people campaigning in COVID times? And so I will. And I'm also going to do a shout out about the importance of supporting independent and progressive candidates and candidates from diverse backgrounds, because we need to have a little bit more diversity on council. But you've got an opportunity to ring people up, tell your story about COVID campaigning. They're actually interested in it, and you may even get some sympathy votes. Reach out. I gave you some tips on how to reach out to community groups through letters and things like that. Advertise. Don't forget the traditional advertising on radio. There's also opportunities if you've got enough money. So I might be talking to someone that's running for Geelong or Orange or Wagga or Albury or Wodonga, like big regional metros. And you might have enough budget that you can advertise on, say, the buses, or put some billboards, the big billboards around town, or even on public transport stops, like on bus stops. They're relatively cheap. And not a lot of people think about that. So advertise. Where can you put your posters and your call flutes? Most towns at the moment are suffering from an economic downturn. Who's noticed that when you walk down the local street, how many shops have got for lease or for sale written across them? It's heartbreaking. Some of these little country towns have just been, you know, just such a whammy from COVID. Like, things were tough before, like with the drought, but with COVID, a lot of these shops are just shutting down. There's an opportunity there if you know some of those real estate agents that work in town, or maybe even the owners of those shops, to ask if you could put your poster up in their window facing out into the street. because people will still see that as they drive past or walk past. And the added bonus is it won't get torn down as well. So think about innovative ways you can advertise. Another tip there is to, we've covered a bit of this promotion. I did that a little bit earlier, but think innovatively how you can promote yourself. One person I know, they're actually doing masks with a vote one for Liz on the mask, and they're giving them to friends. That may or may not be your style, but at least she's getting points for being innovative. I encourage you to stay up to date. Keep looking at your council websites, because they have got the additional training for the compulsory training and the training that is run by the peak bodies. So I mentioned before, MAB, the Municipal Association of Victoria, runs training with councils. The Victorian Local Governance Association also runs training. A lot of that's online now, so you can actually do it again from the comfort of your lounge. So keep an eye on those sort of things and stay up to date. And I would, the action 9 here, and we're nearly at the end, folks, is to read my COVID tips. And we're going to send that out to you after tonight as well. So you get a copy of that. And yeah, hopefully some of that's of use to you in there, because I really, really want some of you to get up and get elected and get climate action happening, because we need it. Okay, I'm going to wrap up. This is my last slide before we go to questions. These are my basic principles to get going. Commit publicly. Start telling people that you're running, because there's no time like the present. Even if you're going to run in New South Wales next year, that means you've got a year to get support happening for your campaign. Particularly if you're running in Victoria and you haven't committed by now, I would encourage you to do so. Importantly, be brave. This is a really important one, because it's tough standing out there as a candidate. I mean, basically you're saying, look at me, I'm great, vote for me, isn't it? Now, most of us are probably pretty humble people, and that's got flashbacks for me back to high school when people stood for school captain, you know, but that's basically the guts of running a campaign is, look at me, I'm great because I want to do this, please vote for me. Be brave about saying that. The first person you have to sell your vote to is yourself. And if you believe in your purpose strong enough, you've sold one vote to yourself, you can sell it then to hundreds and thousands, and you can get elected. I'm pretty much process driven. I had an interview with Cam last week. It's going to be on the podcast tomorrow. I have a background as an agricultural scientist. I've got a degree and a master's in science. So I'm pretty much evidence-based, process-driven, and outcome-focused. And what really helps me with that scientific thinking is thinking, well, what does the evidence say? What do I need to do? And what's my actions? So what I want to pass on to you is set yourself weekly goals, that by this week I would have done this, by next week I would have done that. And that's one way to manage the overwhelming, setting goals and just doing something and working through those jobs. So yeah, there's my 4 tips to nudge yourself along. I hope by now your action book is chockers, lots and lots of actions on it. And I am now probably going to turn my screen off and I'm going to flick it to questions. Cam, how's that?
Ruth, that was amazing. Thank you so much. It was very nuts and bolts. I almost feel like I should probably run for local council here after that. I'd have all the tools.
You are.
Excellent. Any questions from people of Ruth? Feel free just to put them in either the Slido link or in the chat box on the side here. And I'll read them out.
So someone's asked, what's the fine if you don't vote? Well, that differs for every state and territory, and it's actually linked, as anyone who studied acts and legislation, it's linked to penalty units. So it'll be a certain amount of penalty units, and each year the penalty unit value changes. So I can't say exactly what it is for your situation, but you can check it out. It'll be in that candidate's handbook, I'm sure.
Ruth, someone here has said that it's been suggested they should draw attention to the failings of a retiring councillor to try and perhaps get some promotion. That's not their style. Should they should they be a little bit cutthroat about it?
Yeah, so I'm often asked this. It's not my style to slag someone off, and I'm against running negative campaigns. But what you can do is speak in the positive. So if you're a young person, and look, the majority of councillors and MPs in Australia are older white men from an Anglo-Saxon background, right? So if that person, I spoke to a councillor, this was 2 months ago, and they said, oh, well, I want to run on youth. And this guy, bless his heart, was about 70. And I said, oh, well, so how's your Facebook going? He goes, no, I don't do Facebook. And I said, well, do you do any social media? No, it's all rubbish, social media. And I thought, well, how can you engage with the youth if you're not on social? Now, I wasn't suggesting he gets TikTok or anything, but I guess my point there is you can talk about the positive of what you stand for and what you want to do, and your words will be in contrast to the failings of that person. So I'm not really sure what the failing is, but let's just say they don't engage with the community. Your platform could be about proactive community engagement that really listens. So I'll give you an example from the Independent for Indi campaign. There was a notorious former member there, the previous incumbent, and lots of people had bad, yucky stories about this previous incumbent. We never engaged in that. But our messages, Kathy's messages, was local, which by contrast, the previous incumbent was helicopter flying from Melbourne, right? So we didn't have to say that, but by local, it funded. Independent, we didn't have to say how bad the major parties were and how nothing was happening with a safe seat. Independent, by default, said that. And then the last word, effective. You know, so if you're standing as effective, what's the current incumbent? By default, ineffective. So have a play around that. Test your messages. If you want to share that. But I always think it's better to be positive in your campaign. There's enough crap and anxiety in the world at the moment without adding negative stuff to it. What do you reckon? Like, does that work for you? Like, I like to be a person of integrity, and that's, you know, it's easy to take cheap shots, but just remember, if you get elected, there'll be someone doing the same to you.
Yeah.
Oh, yep. No,
sorry, sorry, Cam. Yeah, that was my question, and absolutely, that is exactly how I feel. It was quite a, I just wasn't sure how to sort of take it, because it was like, oh, you know, I know that's how politics is played, and I've got half of these people saying, oh, you know, I'm really worried about you getting involved in council because you don't play dirty. And I'm like, but politics doesn't have to be played dirty. You know, I want to bring a new type of politics.
You do, Laura. Be the change you want to see. And this is when you get out of bed in the morning, what's your purpose? It's a new type of politics. Keep focused on that. And you know what? Every little girl and little boy in the Strathbogie is going to see a person that does politics decently, and they're going to ask you to come and speak at their speech night. You know, like, be the change you want to see. That's what we're here for.
Yeah.
Good one. Good. Yeah, good question. Ruth, advice on how candidates can gauge how winnable a race is if they're considering it.
Oh, yeah, I've got some good advice on this. So, Sam, where are you running? What seat?
I think Sam is. I think Sam's thinking of helping people run.
That's right. Yeah.
In what state?
In Victoria.
Oh, great. Okay. So I'll give you an example. Back to me. I'm not running for politics again. I'm helping people to run. Baw Shire, and I'm in West Ward. So you go to the VEC website and you look at the 2016 election results for Baw Shire, and they break down every ward, and they tell you how many candidates ran for that ward. They tell you what the quota is. So I'll give you the example for West Ward. There might have been 6 candidates that ran, and it was a 3 councillors in the ward, so multi-member ward. So you had a 1 in 2 chance of getting elected. Not only that, then the VEC, it's a gold mine of data. I mean, I know I'm sounding like Anthony Green here, but I do get a bit excited about numbers. It's a gold mine of data, and he will tell you the quota. So, for instance, if there were 7,000 people that live in my West Ward, the quota will be something like 2,000 to get a quota. Now, most people don't get elected on a quota. They get elected on preference flows. So they actually tell you how many votes the first person elected got. So if she didn't get a quota, she might have got 1,800 votes, but the preference flows lifted her up over 2,000. So you've got a pretty rough idea. You go, okay, I need to get 18,000 votes. That's my friends and my family if I lived up in Yakandanda and I was running up there. I'm telling you, hey, Cam. I
Just Indigo Valley.
Yeah, Indigo Valley. I have to ask my friends to vote, family to vote for me would be right. I went to school there. So you get a pretty rough idea from the VEC website, and it'll tell you chances of running. Now, just because 6 people ran in 2016 doesn't mean 6 are going to run again. I reckon it's going to be less. We're going to see a lot more uncontested wards in this election in 2020. There was about 23 uncontested wards last time. We're going to see a lot more, and we're also going to see quite a few incumbents getting re-elected, but we're going to see, unfortunately, quite a few women are stepping down. They're not running again. They've had enough. COVID has been a big kick in the guts, particularly for women. It's known as the she recession, because job insecurity, extra care. So you might be running, in terms of chances, Sam, you might be one woman and there'll be 7 men. You've got a better chance if you're the one woman and there's 7 men, because people want to elect women. So there's quite a few factors, but do your numbers, get your Anthony Green hat on and become a cephalogist. That's the term. Become a numbers nerd.
Ruth, another person has asked thoughts of standing as a block, so a block of candidates. So maybe you've got a few candidates standing for climate action and sort of linked together.
Look, it does work, particularly if they're not dummy candidates. Like if they're genuine candidates, there's a couple of ways that can work. Is you can have one really great candidate who's dead keen and she goes out the front, and the other 2 people say, look, I'm keen, but I really want to do my big shot in 2024, but I want to run for practice in this one. Or I want to run for state upper house in 2022. So I'm going to get campaign practice and, you know, I'm going to give this a really good shot, but, you know, I won't die in a ditch if I don't get elected. But sure, Julie, I'm going to give you my preferences. And if you've got, let's face it, climate action, if you've got a wall of current councillors who will not even entertain anthropological climate change, you might just say, well, you know, stuff this, we're getting 10 candidates to run and we're changing it. Politics, you can do that.
Good one. Another one is, does it get dirty running in local government elections?
Oh, so I'm talking mostly to rural and regional Australians here, and that's not my experience, because dirty people, they play dirty. They have to go. You know, they're on the school council next week, or their kids go to the local school. So everyone knows when you're playing dirty. It's a lot more easier to promise when you're state or federal. Surprisingly, party politics isn't such a big thing in most rural and regional councils, not in my experience. It can be in some metros, but most people are there for the community. And that's why I love working with elected representatives, because most of them are there for the community, trying to do the right thing. Can you still hear me?
Yes, you glitched a little bit there. And this is a more nuts and bolts one. So how does issuing a receipt work for a donation when we're not a registered charity to accept donations? Is it counted as income, and do we need to provide ABNs?
Look, I say to register it, because most campaigns are $2,000 to $5,000. But if you have in Victoria, if you've got an equivalent of $500 of a gift or a donation over $500, that's what you have to report. So as long as you've got a system that's registering all your incoming donations and gifts that are over 500, and it's a robust system, then I haven't read anywhere that you need to do ABNs or anything of that level. But again, read that candidate's handbook, and also the local government inspectorate has guidelines that are the same as that on the candidate campaign returns. So I can't give you the definitive answer on that because I haven't memorised the candidate's handbook, unlike you, who will be able to do that in a couple of weeks.
Another one, Ruth from Row Fry, is any advice on selecting which ward to run in? Living rural in a one-member ward versus running in the city with multiple seats?
Well, where's your passion for change? Where can you make the biggest difference? Let me go back to what's your why to get out of bed? You know, what is it? What do you want to change? And in local government, it's a bit strange because you can live in Bayside Council but own a property down at Inverloch, which allows you to vote in Bass Coast Shire, down, you know, southern Gippsland, and you can also be a councillor there. So that's actually true. There's a councillor there who has a holiday house around Phillip Island but actually lives in Melbourne. So you can physically do it, you can legally do it, but what's your heart calling you to do? Where do you want to make the change? And also, when you are an elected councillor, if your holiday house is in Mansfield and you live in St Kilda, 50% of Shire of Mansfield residents don't live there, then how are you actually going to get around that community when there's, you know, a meeting on a Tuesday night that you need to get to? So the physical travelling requirements do make it a bit difficult if you're not in a councillor, which is your principal place of residence. It can be done, but think about it. And yeah, it just depends on the electability issue. Do those maths, do those numbers, see where you can get elected.
Fantastic. And Ruth, I think this will be the last question of the night because time's drawing to a close. And it's sort of a good one to end on because it's post-election. So after the person's been elected, what's your advice for tackling a toxic council chamber where it's a bit of a blood sport involving egos rather than having environmental and community interests at the epicenter of the goals? So once you're in, how do you...
Tanya,
yeah.
you're speaking to the survivor.
Thanks, Ruth.
Let me tell you, my advice is, so people say, how can I run for politics? You have to have a thick skin. How often do you hear that? And I say, no, you don't. And Mendy, who's been a previous councillor, get this, you actually still need your thin skin because you still need to feel what your community feels. You still need to be empathetic, understanding, and actually care. Care for your community, care for the people, care for the future. So don't get a thick skin, but have your purpose. My advice, I go back to your purpose. Julia Gillard's, keep very clear on your purpose because it will get you through when you're rattled. So when I first ran, it was an all-male council, all the executive CEO, men, wall-to-wall men in suits, 14 men making decisions about our community. And I was there because I didn't agree with the planning situation that was happening. I was a bit, you know, that old pissed off about what they were doing. So I went and made a presentation on behalf of my community. I was asked to speak, 40 community members behind me, and we got the planning decision overturned. Yay, a win for victory. It was the first time I'd ever been in a council chamber. Yeah. 2 weeks later, I was walking down the street and I saw the mayor, who I knew quite well. And I said, Clarky, how come you guys think you can make all these decisions for the community and there's no women there? And he goes, we want women to run. They just don't put their hand up. And I thought, oh, okay. Well, you know, tap on the shoulder, like put up or shut up. And 2 months later, there was a by-election. One of those councillors stood down and ran for state parliament, got elected, and there was a by-election. So I threw my hat in the ring, got elected, and then there was me, 8 other councillors, and still all the male executive. And there was one young guy on council, and he said, oh, I'm so glad you're elected because now they'll pick on you and not me. Ooh. And that's what happened. But what happened then was I had another 2 years there, and over that time, don't get mad, get elected. That's my slogan, which is why I wrote that book, right? So over that time, I worked with women's groups and I worked with other, some of the Bobo Sustainability Network people, sustainable people, and I got them to run next time. But over those 2 years, I got harassed, I got bullied, I got picked on, and I'd never ever experienced anything at that level. I'd been a public servant for a number of years and that stuff would have got people sacked on their ass. So it was the first time I'd got that. It was misogynistic. It was, I won't go into it because that's all gone to the forgettery now. But I got lots of other people to run and 5 of those blokes got kicked out. And then we had a great council of 4 women, and we've never gone back to an all-male council since then. So my simple advice to you would be stay clear on your purpose that would get you out of bed. Don't get mad, get even, and persist. Just remember that slogan, still she persisted. Persist, because you are doing nothing short but changing the world. You're thinking globally as Farmers for Climate Action, and you're acting locally by standing for politics or supporting someone to do so. And that's an enormously satisfying mission. So congratulations to you all for coming along tonight. And I hope you've really got something from that. It's been a real honour to talk to you.
Thank you so much, Ruth. That was fantastic. We'll send around the resources that Ruth mentioned and had tonight. Ruth, can we also send around the slides to participants?
Yeah, I'll do a PDF of them and get going on your actions, peeps.
Great. And I'll also include your website, Ruth, so people can get in touch if they have any further tips or feedback that they'd like to provide. So thank you so much. And don't forget, in 2 weeks, we're doing a nuts and bolts media training session as well, because as Ruth said, media and social media is so important when running your campaign, particularly in COVID times.
Well,
so
everyone will
thank
have
you.
their 25 words or less by then, so that'll be fantastic.
They will. Okay, fantastic. Thanks so much for coming along, everyone.